Hi, this is John B. Cooke. I'm the editor of Comic Book Creator magazine and also the author of the latest release, The Book of Weirdo. And this is my Mr. Media interview.
So I was a little young for underground comics at the height of their anti-establishment run at the end of the 1960s and early 1970s, but still managed to discover them in my teens at places like Weird Harold's Head Shop in Milltown, New Jersey, upstairs and around back from the Krauser's Dairy Store. Most of the social humor and politics of the era went over my head at the time, but I always loved the art and gathered a small stack of those comics over time, spread amongst my piles of Marvel and DC superheroes. The art of Robert Crumb, aka R. Crumb, aka Bob Crumb, aka just plain Crumb, always stood out. His look to his work was always unique unto itself, much as another of my later favorites from the 1980s, Drew Friedman's was. They both drew comics, but they didn't look like Kirby or Ditko or Romita or even Steranko. And Crumb, who often drew himself into his work, was so weird. It all comes together in my friend John B. Cooke's new oral history of Crumb's long-running magazine, Weirdo. In the Book of Weirdo, Cooke interviews dozens upon dozens of creators who worked with Crumb, who created the magazine in 1981, and who was followed in time by artist Peter Bagge and even Crumb's artist wife, Aileen Kominsky, and it recreates what it was like to work with Crumb and what the experience meant to all of them. It is a massive work by Cooke that even Crumb himself questions the logic of, although he admits he learned quite a bit about himself and his magazine by reading it. As for Cooke, who's a graphic designer by day and editor of Comic Book Creator magazine by night, he also worked with his brother Andrew on the documentary Will Eisner, Portrait of a Sequential Artist. This is John's third appearance on Mr. Media. And John B. Cooke, welcome back and back and back to Mr. Media.
Hi, Bob. How you doing?
I'm good, John. How's it going there?
Pretty good. I'm living in deja vu land. We'll get it done. We'll get it done.
Folks, it may be that we've had some technical issues getting to this point, but I think we got it down now. I think we know what we're doing.
I've done almost as many interviews as Bob, so I understand the trials and tribulations.
Man, oh man. So John, this is a truly amazing book. I mean, I feel like I have this grasp of Crumb that I did not before, that I even from the documentary, the Robert Zwigoff documentary Crumb, I didn't have. It just feels like it's like a 360 degrees of Crumb. I know it's focused on the magazine itself, but it really is. It is Crumb, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what it turned into is it turned into a parallel history of not only the magazine, but also, and not only the history of alternative comics in the 80s. And, Crumb says that he perceives a history of the 80s in general through the book, or certainly the themes that run through it. It is a very intimate look at the life of Robert Crumb and Aileen and their baby Sophie. While they lived in a small cottage in Winters, California, they became very neighborly and very much involved in their community. And Robert would go out and play his instruments and all that. And I interviewed, gee whiz, and they would do the photo funnies. That was one aspect of the Fumetti aspect of for the early issues of Weirdo. And then all the neighbors and friends would come and be involved in a lot of these Fumettis, and it became a very, very fun, sociable experience that took place. And so I think you walk away from the book with a real sense of what it was like in his life. The book that I see this is after his IRS troubles, which consumed him in the 70s, and this is before the documentary, which changed his life. I mean, he had moved to France by that time, but still he became a worldwide celebrity, and the paradigm shifted for Crumb and Aileen and Sophie. And it's also interesting to note that Sophie was born 6 months after the first issue of Weirdo, so there's a parallel that goes on with a young Sophie Crumb and the magazine.
There's a lot of personal stuff that I picked up in here. Maybe people who have followed Crumb all their lives, maybe they know this stuff a lot. But you talk about Sophie, and we see the sort of the birth announcement of Sophie, the references. He's figured out there's a comic where he she has this nightmare that he helps her give birth to the daughter.
Aileen.
Yeah, there's at some point where he is selling his daughter's artwork for $10. You can send in and order it. But even before that, there was something that I found amusing. I knew that he's been a musician at times in his life, and that he and Aileen had formed like a wedding band. And I thought, how cool would it be to find some of the people whose weddings Robert Crumb and Aileen played at, right?
I can tell you this much. I think the oddest thing that happened to me personally in the book was I found out that my stepsister was a singer in that wedding band, the Rural Sophisticates, along with Robert Crumb. I had reconnected with her after many years on Facebook. I said I was into comic books, and that was my thing. And this is back in 2006 or so. And she said, "Oh, I was in a band with an artist called Robert Crumb. Do you know him?"
Oh my God! Really?
That was just really wild. She lives in Davis, right outside of Winters and nearby Winters. That was one of the wildest stories. The other story was tracking down Eleanor Northwest. I could not find her for anything. She just had such a notoriety. Everyone, either they hated her or loved her. And, and then, there weren't that many who loved her, but Robert Crumb loved her. Ivan Brunetti, the cartoonist himself, wanted to find her and wanted to know if I could find her. And I made a concerted effort, and I found it through, on the internet, I found it through an obituary, because she had at least a name that was unusual. And I was able to track her down. She lives in the south part of India. Wow. And she's lived there for the last 40 years. And she hasn't picked up a pen to do cartooning, but she was thrilled to be found, and I got a testimonial from her. So, so there you go.
Isn't that something? Well, that gives me a chance to mention there is an Ivan Brunetti interview in the Mr. Media archives. Check that out, folks. Well, so wait a minute. This business about your stepsister, that's not in the book, is it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I missed that then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but there's a lot.
Well, it's a big freaking book. Yeah.
Book. It's a spread called it's the Rural Sophisticates, and she's the girl in the band was her essay that she wrote. So.
Oh, I did see that, and I must have breezed past it. I'm so sorry. That's a great story.
Heidi Beckerbreed. Yeah.
What did Robert think when you told him that story?
He said he remembered her because I wrote it to him in a letter. He remembered her. He remembered her husband, and that was it. And then she had a beautiful voice, and she was a singer. So there was that. He took it in stride. I mean, I'm still astonished by it, and I'm looking forward to very much to seeing her when I go out to the area. I haven't seen her since 1972. Wow. 1973 was my father's second wife.
Wow. Anyway. That's great. And folks, I'm going to admit at this point, this is actually the third time John and I have done this interview this afternoon because of technical issues. But it's the first time that story came up. That's awesome. That is really awesome. This book took you like 12 years to do. Why did it take so long, John?
Well, it was real life got in the way. I mean, I originally, this was intended as the 7th issue, the 6th or the 7th issue, which it wasn't published, Comic Book Artist magazine, volume 2 that I had, that I did with Top Shelf Productions. It was going to be a Peter Bagg issue. I did an epic interview with Peter Bagg. He did a cover. And I wanted to do a complimentary feature. So what better way? He was the second editor of Weirdo. Wanted to do a feature on Weirdo. So I was able to call Robert and Aileen and interview them. And then I go, well, why don't I get in touch with some of the people, a few of the people who contributed to the magazine? Maybe they'll do a testimonial or, just add a few paragraphs or something like that. And it just grew. And in 2007, I wouldn't stop. I mean, I'm as compulsive in a certain way as Robert is. And it just grew. And then the recession hit and I had domestic issues so I shelved it. And then And then in 2011, I decided, I'm going to do that last issue of Comic Book Artist again. And I went to MoCA and announced it, whatever that means. But I went out and I got a whole bunch more testimonials. And then it languished a little bit longer. In 2013, I went out again and got a whole new bunch of testimonials. And then in 2015, I said I should do a book. I had already started Comic Book Creator magazine. I wasn't going to do this book with Tomorrow's just because it's not his audience. I wrote up a prospectus, probably had 75 or 80 contributors at that time. It eventually would be more than 130. And I had a list, and I brought the list to, I said, well, I should bring it to Last Gasp first, because they were the publisher of the original magazine. And Ron Turner was sitting there, and I said, Ron, might you be interested? And I showed it to him, and his eyes just went glazed, and his jaw just about dropped down to the ground, and he just nodded. He just, yes, I want to publish this. And I'm like, okay, that's great. And so let's do a deal. And, by a couple of months later, me and Colin worked out a deal, and it was very, very productive. It was a different book then, I'll have to say. It was going to be half anthology. It was going to be half reprints, the best of the book, and it was going to be one half that was going to be the history. And then as I'm doing it, it's getting longer and longer. And I did the layout and production on the book too, so it's getting longer and longer. I had no room to put the anthology in. I really, honestly, and I'm kind of sorry I did this because it's not kind. I mean, I delivered the book without even mentioning that. I mean, they just saw it for the first time. I did not have any comics in it. Except we do have new comics in it. We got 4 or 5 pages in the end of the book are from modern day weirdos, cartoonists who were influenced by Weirdo. So anyway, and they just kept nodding. They kept saying, yeah, I'll do it. So.
Well, and I'm sure that Ron Turner, this kind of book that he'd love to have, but never dreamed of commissioning, because he could. How do you afford to commission a book like this? And then along comes John B. Cooke, who's just done it anyway, and says, "Look here, I've got this. You want it?" And of course he's going to say yes. And what a treat for you too, I would think. To Last Gasp has this incredible history, and now you're part of it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's. I mean, it's just like Crumb says. I don't know what Cooke gets out of it. There's no way in the world you can really make any money from this. And if it really gets down to it, my wife will remind me repeatedly. It probably gets down to, if we're lucky, 25 cents an hour. Yeah. I mean, I spent on that essay, and that essay that starts the book, which is considerable essay, the history of the magazine. I spent an entire summer on it. And it was worth it. But it was such a big. Because I wasn't just doing the history of Weirdo, I was doing the history of, because you had to do the alternative comics, you had to do Crumb World, and you had to do what was going on, and the minutiae that was going on in the magazine. I mean, I literally had to read every page and especially read all the letter columns and all the editorial material, and it came alive. It came more alive for me. I mean, I had already read most of everything.
And so you had interviewed Crumb years ago for this project, and then you went back to him and interviewed him again. And then I know you just interviewed him last week since the book has come out. What does he make of you? What's his take on this guy who has spent 12 years doing this book and it's finally out?
I went out to lunch with him, with Drew Friedman. It was the 2nd of March of this year with my brother, Andrew, who I do a lot of creative projects with. And the first thing he looked at me is he just chuckled and looked at me, shook his head and said, 12 years? And because he had thought it was 10 years, and I had to remind him. I said, no, actually, 2007 would be 12 years since that. He thinks I'm a nut, so I think he sees a kindred spirit. I am a nut. I'll be the first one to say that. But, I mean, this is the book I want. I mean, this is the book I would want. I mean, it's just like, I wouldn't stop because it's like, okay, I could do an index. But what about the story behind the stories in the index? What about the unpublished covers? And what about and if you look at the notes that I have in the index, it's pretty darn extensive, stuff like that. I mean, everything just kept opening up. People really seem to like it. I haven't heard a negative word on it. So.
Well, in the podcast interview you just did with Robert to help promote the book, you were talking to him about his level of cooperation, and he said that at times you would ask him questions and then he would answer them, and those questions would lead to more questions, and at times he indicated that he didn't immediately answer you because he knew it was just going to be this circling. I don't want to say circling of the drain, but he knew it was just going to more questions and more questions. And, it seems like at times you may have worn the poor man out.
Well, I don't know if his memory of it was as succinct, because so I interviewed him on the phone once. Then I would ask him questions. I think I probably sent him overall, I think I meant maybe 6 letters. And he wrote me back 2 detailed letters. But then recently, in the last March, he wrote me a huge email. Not to say he's on the internet, people. But somebody actually sat down and composed what he'd written out or dictated. But it was very, very detailed. He knew that I was coming to the end game and that there were just things nobody else knew. Some aspects. Yeah, so and I was very touched by the fact that there was an unpublished cover that became part of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund auction. There was an unpublished cover of Weirdo, and I found out by talking to Robert that it was influenced by Sophie Crumb's art when she was 5 years old, when she was about 5 years old.
Oh,
so
right.
I said, can you find a specific drawing that influenced this cover? And he said he spent an entire afternoon, an entire day looking through all of her art. Could never find it, but in Sophie's Evolution of an Artist, I have it around here somewhere. There was a drawing that was very similar to it, and I said, "It's this." Anyway, but he actually went and dug through it, and he reminisced about remembering, and it was a pleasant experience for him to walk down memory lane there. But I was very humbled and touched, and I just know that he's just different than. So many people have expectations of him a lot differently. There's one thing I spoke to. I called Robert Williams, who is absolutely one of my favorite interviews in the book. He's an extremely passionate man. He was one of the Zap Collective, and he's known for really almost creating the whole lowbrow movement. He started the Juxtapose magazine, for instance, and he was just a wonderful cartoonist in his own right. Started anyway. Working in the Southern California whole hot rod culture that was down there. And he said that the book was a testament to Robert's generosity of spirit. And that completely nailed it for me. He was completely 100% right in that. That's the soft, warm, loving, kind, generous, open. There's something about Robert that is just, as a reporter, I'm listening to people tell me stories about how sweet he is and how this, and I'm like, really? Really? But then to really experience it, yeah, it really is. But again, I don't know if I mentioned it. I mentioned this about he does not suffer fools well.
No.
He has no patience, none, if he's not interested in what you're doing. So luckily, I wasn't crazy for Weirdo magazine. I did not buy every single issue. I bought a few issues here and there. I saw it as an opportunity because of the Peter bag, and nobody covered it. There's almost nothing in the historical record. It is a forgotten magazine, and completely forgotten, except by the contributors. And Robert is proud of it. Peter is proud of it. So is Aileen. They're proud of it. And yet they feel that it never got the attention it deserved, and that was a part of it too. It's a drive to as a gift back. It's a really subject.
John, for people who don't know Weirdo magazine, tell them a little about it. What was the content like? What were the highs? What were some of the lows? And who kind of made their careers from being in that magazine that we would know?
It was a comic book anthology that featured basically comic stories, but it also, there were 3 distinct tenures of the editor, Robert Crumb. He created the magazine. it was in a flash of a moment during a meditation session that he had. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, influenced by Harvey Kurtzman's Humbug and Mad Magazine. It became this, he would put his artwork in it, but he would also do stuff from the street artists of Berkeley, such as, Bruce Duncan and Ace Backwards stuff that he would put in there. You had backwoodsman Norman Pettingill, who was a backwoods artist, who did postcards in the 30s that were just outrageous. He did the, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name correctly. He just had a Netflix, a wonderful documentary on him, and I'm going to try to pronounce it right here. Zukolsky. Stanislav Zukolsky. There's a wonderful, Weirdo's in it. It's called Struggle. It's about an artist from the 1920s and 1930s in Europe, and it involves Nazi Germany, and just this guy is really unusual and really interesting. But anyway, his stuff was in there too. It's the first mainstream that anybody, and if you could ever call Weirdo mainstream, but that stuff was exposed. He did that. So anyway, it was a potpourri of different stuff, and his tenure was almost like found objects. It was really, it was never arty. It was really lowbrow. The outsider art. Mm-hmm. This is the best way to do it. Peter came in and he brought in the punk sensibility, and that sense of that he brought in I would say that the stuff was angry, but it wasn't mean. It was wonderful in the sense it was this J.D. King and Kaz, and there's Alexander Ross, not the painter. He is a painter, but never mind. Not the superhero painter. And it was, and then of course there was Drew Friedman, and this whole New York contingency came in. That was a part of it. That came on strong. Under his tenure, and the Letters pages exploded as being a community where the community could of cartoonists communicate with each other anyway. And then Aileen came in, and she really brought not only an international sensibility to it to some degree, but she brought in some of the old underground stalwarts like Kim Deitch. Even Robert Williams have contributed some material. She commissioned work. I think she was maybe Peter did commission some work, but she certainly did. She lobbied for work from Carol Tyler and from Diane Newman, and Bill Griffith was in the back. Mm-hmm. These are real veterans.
So Aileen brought in women who were not maybe as visible in the first two rounds.
Not as visible. I think it was two. She brought in twice the amount of women that her husband had, and pardon me. And anyway, Peter Bagg brought in a number of women, but when she came in, it was. There's a footnote in there. I actually have the statistics. I count.
Okay. You made an interesting point too, or maybe Robert said this. You would talk to him about the influence of punk on Weirdo, and he said he was pretty blunt, as he is about pretty much everything, I think. But he said that he liked this. I think he liked the style of punk. He liked the energy it brought, but he couldn't stand the music itself.
Right. Yeah, he had said that. Right. Yeah. Yeah, he really liked the handmade aesthetic, and that was one of the things that really gave him a charge. Punk magazine that John Holmstrom co-created was it was this handwritten aesthetic that was going on. I mean, John would actually write out entire articles and interviews in handwriting. I know that Robert was somewhat influenced by that. He was influenced by the street comics, as I said. And mini comics need a shout-out, too. They were a real thing that was taking place that's outside of any commercial sensibility, outside of any mainstream, where these Xerox, just because Xeroxes became more plentiful and cheaper, it was just really astonishing. Like Mary Fleener would make up her own comics and fold them and throw them in a envelope and mail them off to others, and they would mail her the cartoons, and that was just wonderful. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of them ended up in Weirdo magazine.
So you acknowledged a little while ago that you did not always love Weirdo. It was not always great. It had great moments, but it wasn't always great. It wasn't something you had to personally buy every issue. And yet here we are talking about something that you managed to write, what, 280, 290 page book about. What is it? What is it about Weirdo, about its history, about all these people who were willing to do testimonials about the book? How do you, what do you come away from with this? How do you summarize all that?
Well, I sang the praises of an unsung thing in life. I gave attention to. I like to think I gave attention to something that was being ignored. I've always identified with the outsider. I'm a comic collector. It hasn't always been easy, and I do like a lot of mainstream stuff, but I think my passion has always been for handmade kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like a lot of this gets down to, because Jules Pfeiffer did his homemade radio comics in the great comic book superheroes. In that famous book that came out in the mid 60s, there was a revolution. I mean, that was a revelation for me. It just was like, we can do it ourselves. And then I saw in 1971 or 1972, I saw Locust magazine, which was a science fiction newsletter, and it was kind of crudely done. It's very, I bet you it's still in print. It's very professionally done now, but it was like, I looked at it and I said, I could do this. And there's this real revelation that comes out. Somebody had said this on Facebook, and I don't know if I'm quoting it correctly, and I'm really angry I didn't write it down at the time. But she said that Raw Minghu wants to do comics, but Weirdo showed her that she could. And that is that you didn't need to have specific drawing chops to do it. If you had a story to tell, let it out. And Raw was very... there were much more accomplished artists, in Raw than often were in Weirdo. It's a lot of crude shit, Weirdo. But it had something. There was something to it, I mean, I'm passionate about the magazine, and people are very, very passionate about Weirdo in comparison to Raw. I mean, people like Raw, people love Raw, but do they get passionate about it? Not as much as Weirdo. I think it's a defensive mechanism for Weirdo. It's like we're on the defense. We're just like, yeah, okay, we look like crap.
Well, and so Raw, which was Art Spiegelman's,
and Francois Moulet's,
right? Their magazine, just as in many ways Weirdo is Robert and Aileen Kominsky-Crumb's magazine. They have a bit of a history of kind of a cat and mouse game with them. They haven't always respected each other's product. Robert refers to Raw and those guys as having been very fussy over the years, and Spiegelman not necessarily terribly respectful to the product of Weirdo. I think I mentioned to you earlier that it seemed to me that there's probably a good book just in the differences between those two camps and their handling of each other. Did they ever fight over artists and work? Were there ever issues?
No, I mean, after all, Art, had something in Weirdo, and Robert had a few stories in Raw. They were colleagues. They were compatriots. I think there was the rivalry. There was a rivalry that was going on. I think that Art has softened his opinion of Weirdo. I think he's softer about it. Legend has it that he called it a piece of shit, and it hurt. I know it hurt Robert's feelings. I asked him point blank. I said, do you think you're hypersensitive? And he goes, yeah, I think I am. But for anyone to characterize Raw as being too fussy, Robert has hell of a nerve saying that, because I mean, after all, his pursuit of perfection is what he does is very accomplished, kids. I mean, it's very accomplished, and his pursuit of perfection is pathological. So
now I'm thinking everyone will have a different way of adding up the years, but I'm thinking in about a decade, comics in some form will be about 100 years old as we think of them. We'll be coming up on about 100 years of comics. You place Crumb very high up in the pantheon of the top comic artists, and that's a tremendous number of artists. Who are your top three?
Well, Crumb would be there. I think there are three, and I think he's a genius. I do. I think there are three in American comics. I think there are three geniuses, and I think the other is his greatest influence is Harvey Kurtzman. I think, and his mentor and his God, in many ways. He actually worked for Kurtzman when he was in his early 20s. Kurtzman is the great American satirist. He created Mad Comics, which begat Mad Magazine, and then there's Jack Kirby. And Jack Kirby for adventure comics, there's just is nobody better. He was my first. I'm a nut for Jack Kirby. I did a book called Kirby 100 on the Centennial 2 years ago, and so and I've done a documentary on Eisner, and I'm kind of covering my cartoon gods, I mean, I'd love to do a book on Raw. I just don't know if I could do, and I asked Art, I said, do you think, she goes, well, it's up to Francois. I haven't asked her yet. But I don't know, and if it couldn't, I don't think it could be the same. It would be something different, but those are the three. Carl Barks is real close, a lot of these guys, and so anyway.
And you're working on two more big books. You're working on a book for Tomorrow's, right? Summing up their
25th anniversary. The World of Tomorrow's. It's an oral history, pretty much, of some of its interview, most of its testimonial, history of the comic company. I mean, the book publishing magazine company. I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
They're fantastic. I first started working for John Morrow, and that's what brought me into doing this comic book related stuff. And I'm also doing a 50th anniversary book of Last Gasp. I talked Ron and Colin into doing it, and it has to be done. Their anniversary is actually, you can get them down to a date, and they were their first Earth Day in 1970 was when he distributed Slow Death Eco Funnies, #1. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I'll go to San Francisco. I'll go see him. And I'm now designing a Mac Rayboy book right now. I've got to finish this issue of Comic Book Creator Magazine. You want to? No, you don't. You don't want to see my office.
Oh, that's your office? I was going to tell people that you had to go over to a neighbor's house because the internet was down at your house.
Yeah, it's not mine. So. I mean, I really hope that people read the book. I thank you for your endorsement. I think it's a fun book. It's not me; it's the people who contributed to the book, and it's a love letter to Robert and Peter and Aileen.
And so, because of this book, you have also kicked off a podcast that you're doing. You want to talk about that for just a second? It's Subterranean Dispatches.
Yeah, I was driving up to visit Dennis Kitchen a couple of Sundays ago, and I was meeting Pete Poplatsky for the first time, who I had email with, and I just love his artwork, and I love the guy. I just think he's fantastic, and I got to meet him. And as I'm driving up, I'm thinking, you know what? I'd like to interview these guys, and what can I do? You know what? I'd like to do a podcast. I really would like to do a podcast. What would I call it? And I spent most of the 2-hour drive trying to figure out what I would call it. It was Subterranean what? And I finally came up with Subterranean Dispatch, which is obscure enough. And it's a podcast that's going to be, I want to interview, the next book I want to do, one of the next books I want to do is I want to do a history of comics from that are somewhat music influenced from punk in New York in the 1970s to Seattle in the 90s with grunge. And all that took place in between that, which is Weirdo's a big part of that. But I want to get it down because I've met so many different cartoonists and they have such fascinating stories. So what's a good way to do that? Why don't I get a lot of interviews done and I can broadcast them out? I mean, I can do a lot of interviews. Like Bob Lawrence said, do a lot of interviews, and we can get them up. And I got them out of the way, but I always will have reference. I can go back and get the material.
Will you? I imagine you've recorded a lot of interviews over the years leading up to this. Will we see many of those turn up? Will we get to hear those?
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean that's editing, right? Because there's always stuff that's off the record. But I have I've been in this. I don't know how many I've done. I've done probably half as many as you, but that's a lot.
It's a lot.
And I got a lot of audio tapes, and I got a lot of electronic files, and yeah, and a lot of people who have since passed away. Any number of people who have. I was just posting pictures of Jay Lynch. I miss him, and I dedicated the book of Weirdo to him because he was one hell of a historian, and he was one hell of a good guy.
All the interviews that I recorded for the Eisner book 15 years ago. When I was done, I thought, what am I going to do with that? And I contacted somebody there, and I donated the CDs that they were all on and the microcassettes, and I donated them. And a few years later, I went back and called them because I had a question about something. Oh, we don't have those. What do you mean you don't have them? We don't know. No, you never sent them to us. I said, yeah, I sure as hell did. So those will never show up to the best of my knowledge. I would love to share those, but unless the Billy, what the hell is it? Billy Ireland Museum, right, at the Ohio State University. Unless they can find them, we'll never hear them again. Oh well. But so how often will you do the podcast?
I like to do twice a week, but the thing is right now, and I got to ask my friend Bob Andelman about some of this stuff. I mean, I'm not exactly swimming in money, so I started a Patreon account, which is whatever. I don't even know how to go about doing it, but it's interesting. I have $2 in there. Oh, somebody's donated $2.
I'll match that.
I got to pay for the hosting. I got to find the right provider to host the podcast. It's right on one that can only do the 190-minute interview for now. I'd love to do it a couple of times a week. I am way overextended, crazy extended, but I think I'm probably dumb. I think it could be easy.
Yeah, we can have that conversation off air sometime. I'll help you with that. I'd be happy to. Nice. Well, listen, considering that we pretty much spent the whole day together, I'm going to let you wrap up. And I want to say, folks, you can find John B. Cooke's latest book, The Book of Weirdo, in great stores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. If you are watching or listening to the show on one of the players on MrMedia.com, further down the page, you'll see the cover of the Book of Weirdo. You can click on it right now. Order the book from Amazon. I understand with drones, you might be able to have it to your house in, 30 minutes or something. Probably faster than you can get pizza. Is the book available as an ebook or strictly as a hardcover at this point?
No, it's strictly as a hardcover.
Okay.
We got to figure out. I do want to if you don't mind, to give a quick shout out to Drew Friedman and his the partnership that I've had with him through the history of this book. Mm-hmm. I pursued him back, years ago. I pursued him to, thinking, maybe he'll say yes. I don't have any money, but maybe he'll say yes to do a cover. And he was like, well, I don't know if you can afford me, kid. But then I published, Rob Zementek wrote a piece on Drew, and that brought us closer together. Mm-hmm. And then he suggested it as a totally 100% original idea. Maybe I could do the cover. And it was like, yeah. And, so we became close, a little bit closer as that went. And right now we're just virtual partners in promoting the book. And he did this wonderful cover. He wrote the introduction.
Right.
I hope to get somebody else for the introduction, but then Drew says it. I'll do I'll pinch hit for the introduction, but you can go off and try to find someone else if that's okay. That's okay with me, he said. And that was very kind, and it's in the spirit of generosity that just permeates this book. Did I mention the Robert Williams phone call I had? I did, right?
Yep, I think so.
Because we got so many versions of
yeah, it's crazy.
But a big shout out to Drew Friedman, and we're going to be at the East Coast Comic Con in mid-May. I think May 18th or whatever the Saturday is in mid-May. At the East Coast Comic Con in Secaucus, New Jersey, we're going to have a big Weirdo get-together, and we're going to have the official release of the book. And Drew's coming, and Kaz is coming, and Kim Deitch is coming, and Carol Tyler's coming, and any number of people. Mark Newgarden's coming. Anyway, I'm missing names, and I apologize, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And so there's that. And we're going to do a signing at the Society of Illustrators on June 6th, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Why not?
Sure.
Come down and for a book signing and a lecture or panel discussion at the Society of Illustrators in Manhattan.
That's D-Day for Drew Day.
And in San Diego. And today I open up or somebody directs me to open up the webpage, the homepage for Comic-Con International, and there's my picture. My wife says there's no living with me now. My head was the biggest one there, and it's getting bigger and bigger. I'm loving this. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me, and I'm going to play it for all it's worth.
That's great.
It's a joyful experience. I'm a very, very lucky person.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Robert.
Well,
thank you for helping you share the word. That's wonderful.
Well, you're entitled to it. I know how hard you've worked over the years. And folks, you can find John on Twitter and Facebook. He's out there. Look him up. And John B. Cooke, my friend, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Media. First, second, and third times today.
Thank you. And third time in the history of Mr. Media. Right
That's
now.
right. Yeah.
We'll
have you back for the fourth time.
All right.
Turn your back on the deceiver. It's a bad idea to believe her. A bad idea to believe her. Turn up the stereo receiver. Turn up the stereo receiver.